Good evening. The clip that you just saw is from the film The Supreme Price, which is an incredible film about our next guest, Hafsat Abiola. It's about her life, her leadership, and the long line of, as you can see, democracy and human rights leaders in Nigeria. So as you saw, Hafsat Abiola's father, MKO Abiola, was the first democratically elected president in Nigeria after a very long military rule. And after he was elected, the election was annulled by the military. He was immediately thrown in prison, and her mother, Kudirat, began advocating on his behalf to release him. So Hafsat, at that time in 1993, you were in college in the United States. You never saw yourself as a future activist at that time, but there was something that happened on your college campus, and I really believe that all really great leaders like you have that moment, that sort of call to action when they realize they have to step up, they can no longer sit on the sidelines. So tell us about that moment for you.
I was in school, and while things were happening in Nigeria, and there were important things, and I was empathetic, I was sympathetic, I wanted to help. I had no idea what I could do to help. And one day I was coming back to my dorm through Harvard Yard, through the Widener Library, and in front of the library there was a long table with students petitioning. And the students were the kind of students that I never talked to on campus. It wasn't that I saw myself as like a snob, but you have to keep in mind that I was raised in a very conservative Muslim family in Lagos, in Nigeria. And these students were students that had like spiked green hair, very long hair from like people from the 60s, and like free love and all of this. And you know, while I'm happy about their self-expression, you know, I just could not imagine my parents being happy for me to have these kinds of people that I'm talking to. So I was looking for a way to avoid them because they were petitioning, and I thought, what would they be petitioning for? People that look like this, maybe the right to walk bare feet on campus on Sundays, you know, or something. So I was trying to avoid them. And I think they decided not to let me. So as I was trying to walk around their table, two of them left the table and came and stood in front of me. And they said, we're gathering signatures. There's an elected president in jail in Nigeria, and we're demanding his release. And that moment, I felt my whole body, but especially my head, grow hot. I don't know if this ever happens to you. In Nigeria, we say, Ori mi gbono, which is my head grew hot. And I had tears in my eyes, you know, and I said, do you know you're speaking about my father? And they didn't know. They didn't know. And they said no, that they were part of a group called Amnesty International, and that Amnesty had sent them some information from the headquarters in DC, and they were now gathering signatures. And they said, could you come and speak to us about what is happening in Nigeria? And I said, yes, I would. And I ran home. I ran to my dorm and I called my mom. And I said, Mommy, there's some people here and they want to help. Can you send me information about the treason charges and the trial? And she said she would. And in that time, it was before email, so she had to fax it. So I had to go back to Harvard Yard, to the shop, a little shop beside the bagel shop, where you could get the fax. And she had sent the fax, and at that time, I know there's some young people who never had to deal with faxes. You send faxes, and then you have a cover letter. And the cover letter, my mother had written, Hafsat, I've been waiting for you to ask to help. Thank you. And so what was it for me? It was just that those young kids gave me an entry point. My family, as I said, it's a Muslim family. Not all Muslim families are polygamous, but mine is. And I have 18 brothers and sisters. And I was the one that did the most. And I really credit it to those young kids who were petitioning that day.
So as we saw in the film, your parents were both killed in the work that they did. First, your mother, who, as we saw, was killed by the military, and then your father, who mysteriously, on the eve of his release, in front of the State Department officials who had come to visit him on the eve of his release, collapsed. And of course, in the autopsy, they say they found nothing, but I know that you believe, and many people believe, that he was poisoned. What I find so interesting about you, and I've known Hafsat for about 20 years. We've worked together quite a bit. And what I find so amazing about this woman is that so many people at that time then called for her to come back to Nigeria and step into her parents' shoes and potentially run for president. And I remember I asked her at that time, are you planning to do that? Because, worried about my friend. And she said, no, because we don't need one great leader. We need a ground shift, a groundswell of a different cadre of leaders. So that's really how you, as I see it, have continued your parents' legacy of human rights and democracy in the country. Tell us about your work and how that journey began.
So when my mother was killed, I decided that I would create an organization named for her. And her name was Kudurat, which is an Arabic name, begins with a K. And I thought, what one word described my mom that has K in it? And I thought kind, because my mom was really the kindest person I knew, very gentle, very kind human being. So then I now try to find words that would make sense to name an organization that spelled kind. And I decided to call it Kudurat Initiatives for Nigerian Democracy. But when I reflected on it, I thought, well, who knew what Kudurat would have done with her life had she not been killed? She might have gone global. And here I am limiting this poor woman. So I took the Nigeria out, and then I called it Kudurat Initiative for Democracy. And we are actually in many more countries than Nigeria, although our presence is strongest in Nigeria. And, it's funny, Alyse, that I said that to you like maybe 15, 16 years ago. But having worked in Nigeria now for so long, since 1999, it's very clear to me that the position I took was correct, because the problem isn't just the leader at the top in Nigeria. It's that we've all imbibed certain positions that are not in the best interest of the country. To change it, you need to change so much, not just from the leader, but from many layers of the society. And now, at this point, Kind has trained over 7,000 women and girls across Nigeria. In the Northeast, where the insurgents are rampant, we've trained about 500. And all these women and girls, we train them and encourage them to start expressing leadership, going and serving in their communities, in their universities, in their high schools, even running for local government or running for state government or national elections. And it's this way that we can start to shift the way we do things in Nigeria. And I feel like all of these people, now we have a very good precedent, but the more of us that are ready to take responsibility in a good way for Nigeria, helps the president to succeed. He's not going to succeed on his own.
And now, of course, you recently decided to take on a position in government. I know you're working for the governor in one of the largest states of Nigeria. And your new president, Buhari, has talked a lot about rooting out corruption. And looking over the past 7 years, uncovered that $6.8 billion was siphoned off by government officials from the people of Nigeria. And $2 billion of that was supposed to go to fight Boko Haram.
Yeah.
So how do you begin to address that? How do you begin to address this cycle of corruption? Nigeria is a very wealthy country, but yet so many people living in poverty, so many people illiterate. How does that not frustrate you on a daily basis?
I actually think that the 6.8 billion figure is an underestimate. I think because the central bank governor in 2014, the current king of Kano, the emir of Kano, when he was central bank governor, he said 20 billion was missing from the national treasury. whereupon it was suspended by the president. I mean, it was a very strange situation because this was somebody raising an alarm that we should have responded to, and in response, he was punished and penalized for raising that alarm. I think Nigeria, and I think Nigeria is just the kind of place you get when you do not penalize people for doing the wrong things. It's not any different from the US. And the US would look exactly like Nigeria if you could get, the other day when I was last in the US, there was some report about one of your airlines and they'd colluded with somebody and then done something. And it was on NPR. But because you can do all these things and investigate and reveal this information, and then the person was forced to resign, and who knows if there will not be a case brought against the airline. Now, any airline that sees that happen will not do the same thing. In Nigeria, there will be no penalty. So that's the problem. And the current president, when he came in, started going hard at those people who have been stealing. So now there are trials of the people the National Security Advisor who was in charge of the $2 billion, which he then shared among a group of friends. Instead of giving it to the soldiers. So soldiers were going to fight, and they didn't have enough weapons. And when they deserted, they would be rounded up and charged with treason, which, when found guilty, they're going to be executed. It's a very strange situation where you create a crisis, and then you penalize people because they're responding to the crisis you created. But now that person, his name is Dasuki, is undergoing trial. He keeps trying to get bail, but somebody that could steal $2.1 billion, any kind of bail, you give him bail, you will blink and he's gone. He would have disappeared to some place, found a new identity, or we start this long process of petitioning for extradition, and we won't get him back. And the lesson, what Nigerians will learn from that is, if the problem is not to steal small, because actually if you steal small bits of money, you will be caught, and then you will actually go to trial, and you will go to jail. But if you steal big sums of money, you just pay the judge or you pay somebody else and you are off. And actually, even part of the corruption efforts, the anti-corruption efforts, is finding that judges have been paid in the past for stalling corruption cases. So we're really trying to clean house in Nigeria. But you see, there's a challenge for the president because what he can do is dependent on the goodwill of the Nigerian people. And what the Nigerian people see now is that because of the oil prices having dropped so drastically and our economy being so dependent on oil, our exchange rate in Nigeria as now, it used to be 162 naira to a dollar. Sometimes it's 400 naira to a dollar under the new president. So do you know that there's now a campaign? You all know about the Bring Back Our Girls campaign? There's now a campaign that is gaining momentum in Nigeria that says bring back corruption. Because Nigerians are saying, if before it was 162 naira to a dollar and there was corruption, and now you're fighting corruption and it's 400 to a dollar, well, bring back corruption. And clearly they need to take Economics 101. But how many people in the US understand Economics 101? Talk less of Nigeria. So you can see why it's such a challenge sometimes to create and sustain change.
So we know that corruption in Nigeria has certainly led to widespread poverty. Has poverty also led to the rise of extremism and of groups like Boko Haram that last year was called the most dangerous terrorist group on the planet?
So what I think is that what is leading to the rise of militant groups like Boko Haram is more misgovernance or undergovernance, or the absence of government is what leads to it. It creates a void in communities that religious fundamentalist groups can then fill. And so it's not just poverty, because Nigeria is not the only place with poverty. But what you find is that in northeast Nigeria, where you have Boko Haram, it's also the part of Nigeria where you have the highest incidence of maternal mortality. So I don't know what your maternal mortality figures for the US are. It's probably max, it would be like 20 women per 100,000 births, in the US. I think Sweden is 6 to 100 per 100,000. In northeast Nigeria, it is 1,549 women per 100,000 births. Northeast Nigeria is also the part of Nigeria with the lowest literacy, with about up to 70% of people not able to read and write. 4% of the children, of the girls, will go to high school from northeast Nigeria. They have the highest incidence of poverty. But all of these things are byproducts of poor governance. And the people see that they don't matter to their government, that the government doesn't care about them. After some time, they will respond, and in other parts of Nigeria, they respond because we're more, in the south especially, we're more westernized. So what we do is criminal activity. You see an armed robber or a burglar, a kidnapper. In the north, they're more into religion. Religion is the language of, it's the way they talk. They can speak English, but when they speak in English, if you say, how are you, they'll say, we're thankful to God. It's English, but it's really very much about religion. So when they were organizing in the north, when you have religion and you can use it to organize, what you are going to organize, it's almost like a military operation. So what you have in the south is all these individual operations. They can be contained by the soldiers, they can be contained by the police. The north, whenever they organize, you really regret the lack of governance. They organized in the 80s, the Meta-Sina, and the current president actually at the time was Chief of Army Staff. He led the effort to contain them and he succeeded. So now they've organized again, and he's again leading the effort, is containing them. But the truth is, unless we govern correctly and adequately and appropriately for our people, in another 30 years, we will see another uprising.
Hafsat, you are the most resilient person I know. Really, I mean, I remember knowing you obviously during the time right after your parents had died and finding out that the bullets that killed your mother could only have been bullets that the military had, that the government had, but yet they denied it. Obviously, your father was very wealthy. He was a very successful businessman in the IT space. All those assets were seized. When I met you, I know you were basically supporting yourself and your 4 siblings in a small apartment. But you never have any anger about this. You're incredibly resilient, just calm among the chaos. Where does that center come from with you?
I believe that we're all energy. We're all forms of energy. And I have faith in humanity. I was raised by people that had faith in humanity. And I think, if you start getting upset about the things you've seen, what do you want to do about the things that you gained because of the things you saw? I want to be upset about my parents and how their lives were taken from them. At the same time, I'm also so proud of them for standing up for Nigerian people in the way that they did and for doing their best. And it's hard to eat your cake and have it. So I have to choose, which one do I want? And really, in the end, I'm just so proud. And then I can only stay in that space of being happy to have seen their example. And then if I want to be upset about the losses, material losses that my family has suffered, I don't know how I would then cope when I go to a place in Nigeria and somebody says, "Are you our father's daughter?" And right away they want to help, whatever it is. If it's a government building and I've come to request a visa or something, and they say, "Are you our father's daughter?" And right away they start processing, okay, so what do I do with that? I think that life gives and life takes, and it also gives. And if you are spending so much time looking at the things that have been taken away, you don't even see what it has given. And that's a mistake.
Thank you, Hafsat. I know that you have said you need a ground shift, but I think we need Hafsat Abiola for president in Nigeria. Thank you so much.
Thank you.